Hi guys, I'm Denasia Kennedy Smith.
How you doing, everyone? My name is James Ricks.
I'm Karima Wren.
Hello, everyone. I am Taya Hill.
Hello, I'm Michael Johnson.
My name is Charisma Mitchell, and we are the Empowered Scholars.
You may be wondering, what exactly is the post-traumatic slave syndrome? To our understanding, the post-traumatic slave syndrome is a set of beliefs, actions, and behaviors from generational trauma. This is from African Americans, and this is based off the enslavement years ago that has happened to African descent and Africans. Throughout this video, you will see how the Empowered Scholars use media, our new culture, police use of deadly force, representation, education, dehumanization, and life in bondage to explain the generalization of post-traumatic slave syndrome. Enjoy. But first, here's a little segment on Dr. Joy DeGruy, who came up with the disorder post-traumatic slave syndrome.
People assume that a fair number of Africans had to have had post-traumatic stress disorder. You think? I'm not talking about us, I'm talking about them. Untreated, though, right? Okay, so now let's do the math. Mom, who saw dad sold or sister raped, has post-traumatic stress disorder. Still mom, though, right? Only mom now has outbursts of anger, feeling of foreshortened future, difficulty falling or staying asleep, hypervigilance. That would be mom. Now, Johnny or Mary or Shaquisha did not have the original trauma. But what are they learning? So I didn't have to be traumatized. Now, the other thing is, do you think Johnny and Mary got traumatized too? Do you see? So what happens in your environment, you learn from the significant others in your environment. And if they're broken, guess what you're going to be? You're learning from broken people. And you're normalizing that behavior. And then it becomes, years later, 2008, that's their culture.
Our new culture. From Africa to stolen land to becoming property slaves, this is our new culture. The truth withheld and lies told, this is our new culture. Ancestors fighting for their lives while experiencing hell on earth, this was their new culture. From religion, traditions, language, and dignity being stolen, this became our new culture. Treatment of slavery being passed down through generations, this was our new culture. Traumatic experiences leading to unusual actions, this became our new culture. What we see is what we do, what we hear is what we speak. Learning from our environment. And they call it our culture.
This is the syndrome.
This is the syndrome.
This is the syndrome.
My section for post-traumatic slave syndrome is education. I will argue that the long-term effects of racial trauma are very present in the behaviors and beliefs of the black college student, solely off the base that black parents back in the day were very abused and were in a psychological and physical stress. So they taught us how to cope with oppression by lowering our standards, our expectation, and a little respect for ourselves. Also want to argue that opportunities are very limited based off that kind of stress. The fact that slave owners didn't allow us to read because they were fearful of our black consciousness, thinking that we would know the absolute truth and we would revolt against them. And that with these Jim Crow laws, even though we were separate but equal, we still didn't have the necessary materials to be successful or at least to survive.
When taking a look at the post-traumatic slave syndrome, one thing that is good to look at is media's contributions to our self-image. The media controls what will be depicted. When looking at the media and how African Americans are portrayed, it is rarely the truth being shown. Mass media gives an incomplete and misleading view of African Americans. The media can affect our own mental state by making us believe that in our community there is a lack of power. We also tend to start to actually believe the things the media shows to portray our community. This then affects our overall selves and how we view ourselves. Another thing about the media is that it fulfills the stereotype. The media tends to fulfill the stereotype of African Americans, specifically in television. If us as people see ourselves as people with little power, we then tend to portray the roles that the media deems us as.
How blacks or African Americans adapt to certain situations or circumstances that is thrown at them. For instance, say if a white male has given, say, a black African American woman a task, he will look down on her for her to fail, because as a white supremacist, they look down for us to fail because they know we're not capable of those abilities that we know that we can become.
Dehumanization was the strongest force to post-traumatic slave syndrome. Medical records in 1859 suggested that black skin was the foil for white skin, diagnosed as congenital leprosy, giving white doctors and slave masters the right to experiment medical practices on black bodies. In addition to explaining the pathology of their medical practices, white supremacists also transformed the physical appearance of the Son of God to a white-skinned, blonde-haired, blue-eyed figure, which made anyone that worshipped this figure want to be closely physically like the figure, the Son of God. Humanization is powerful because if a man can hate himself, then he will hate anything that looks like him.
Slave syndrome, one thing comes to mind. How black males are always getting shot from behind. It's like it's some kind of sport. Police use the deadly force, but it's always our kind. Almost every black man at some point has been harassed. The whole superior black image has been trashed. A number's been assaulted, by some have been murdered. Hands up saying don't shoot, but their voices murmured. Most incidents, victims are black and unarmed. But something about seeing a black male makes them alarmed. Routinely caught respond to dangerous situations. They always assume every black male have gained relations. They always react quick and take it overboard. But parents should ever see a child on the poster board. I understand that the jobs are quite parentless, but the result of situations are always deemed careless. So, to the list of growing casualties: Trayvon, Eric, Michael, Tamir, Watson, Freddie.
To conclude, you are probably wondering, how do we heal from this syndrome and why is it important? As my colleagues and I have creatively explained the factors that tie into the post-traumatic slave syndrome, we understand why Dr. Joy says we must heal. It is important because we want to end the generational pattern of injuries due to this trauma that includes self-esteem, present anger, and how we educate each other on racism. We must heal by first being aware of the problem, educating ourselves, understanding ourselves, building our self-esteem, being open to family members about issues, knowing the truth about the world, realizing how we can be a leader for younger generations, and lastly, how to keep our faith. This concludes our project on the post-traumatic slave syndrome. Thank you.